Good evening and welcome to our Exodus study. I'm glad you decided to tune in with us as always. We are in Exodus chapter 9 today. Now, I just want to recap because we did not meet last week and I want to bring you up to speed. We are in the middle of the infamous plagues. You know, everybody thinks that we talk about them. We learned about them in The Prince of Egypt, 20 years ago when that cartoon came out. We've talked about them in Sunday school. Everybody draws the little cartoons with the blood in the water or the boils on the skin or the frogs taking over. And we are smack dab in the middle of that story. Now, I want you to remember that Pharaoh asked the question of Moses. He said, "Who is God? I don't know this God. I know Osiris, I know Ra, I know the nut God, I know this one, that one, and the other, but I don't know Yahweh. Jehovah is not my friend. We don't hang out at the meetings. I don't worship him in the Nile River. Who is this guy?" Now, I want to make you aware. I really want this to make sense. I wanted to sit down with you. There are over 120 gods in the Egyptian pantheon. They had a God for everything. They had a God of sleep. They had a God of waking. They had a God of the sun. They had a God of the sand. They had a God of the storms. They had a God of the atmosphere. And we're going to talk about that today. They had a God over everything. And if one God failed them, they just moved down the list to the next one. And if you recall at the beginning of the series, I told us, we went to Psalm 82, I told you about the Elohim versus the Elohim and how God is establishing himself as the top dog. But I want to ask the question before we begin tonight, what's number one in your life? I feel like people ask that question all the time, but truthfully, what is really number one? Because for I think a lot of us, the first thing we reach for in the morning is our phone. We reach for our phone when we sit on the toilet. We reach for our phone when we wake up. We reach for our phone when we're driving down the road. We reach for our phone when we're bored. When we see people we don't want to talk to in public, we reach for our phone. We're texting, and we are all consumed by our phone. And if it's not your phone that is the God, for some of us, it is the opinions, the public opinions of some people. But God here in this narrative is trying to establish for us who is number one. So we're in Exodus chapter 9. I'm going to read primarily today from the NIV, and we're going to go that way. Before we begin, though, I want to establish this idea that superstitions are inherently pagan. Anybody's grandma ever said your left hand is itching, the palm of your hand, you got money on the way? Your right hand, it's money on the way. You know, kids say the chant, you step on a crack, you break your mama's back, step on a line, you break a spine. You know, some people are deathly afraid of cats, especially black cats, because if they cross in front of you the wrong way, bad stuff is going to happen. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people who, if they say something that they don't want to jinx, they have to go and knock on some wood, because they are afraid that what they've just said is about to come to pass. But I want us to sit here because superstition is inherently pagan. As a matter of fact, the knocking on the wood thing came from people who believed that there was an atmospheric God who, if they said something they didn't want to say, they would bang on the trees to get his attention so that he wouldn't allow it to happen. And I think we have culturally made those things normal. We've culturally made those things normal. I remember being a kid, and it was a cuss word to call the Lord's name in vain. And the older we get, and the more TV we say, all of a sudden it starts slipping out of our mouth, "Oh, Lord." Oh, you know, and we become more casual. Same thing has happened with the word luck. I remember in my household as a kid, you didn't say good luck, because we weren't lucky, we were blessed. You know, we had those things, they were ingrained in us, but the older we get, we say, well, good luck. I hope you have a good luck on your interview. And we've indoctrinated those secular ideas into our spiritual self. So today, I want us, with that foundation in place, I want us to begin reading. All right, we're in Exodus chapter 9. I'm reading from the NIV, and it reads this way. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, and on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. He says, let my people go. Now, this is not the first time that he has said, let my people go. But I want to remind you just for a second, if only for a few seconds, that he says, let my people go, reminding Pharaoh why he's showing up. I'm not telling you to let them free or to let them go for the sake of freedom. And I want to pause here. I want to sit here. I want you to have some life application moments, because I think a lot of times we think freedom in Christ is for our own selfish gain. I'm free to do what I want to do. I got freedom. I've got life more abundantly. But God explicitly says here, he says, let my people go so that, there's some ramifications, just so that they can worship me. And I want you to see this. God frees us from whatever our pet sin is, not so you can just be free, but so that you can worship him. Because I want you to understand this, that there's a lot of us who are bound by something. We're bound by sin, bound by Satan, bound by something else. And in the void of the presence of God, we'll just walk from bondage to bondage. Okay, what do I mean? You can go from doing a drug. Let's say that marijuana is your drug of choice. You'll go from marijuana, and if that's not replaced with the presence and power of God, you'll go from marijuana to alcohol. And then if you get off of alcohol, you'll get free from that. And if that's not replaced with the presence and power of God, you'll go from alcohol to sex, extramarital sex. And then you'll get free from that, and then you'll go from that, and the next thing you know, you're hopping from sin to sin, because without the presence and power of God, you'll forever be bound by something. There is no freedom without the presence of God. There is none. And I want to say this, and I want to say this very clearly and very boldly, because we live in a society that promotes freedom, or the appearance of it. Oh, I'm a free spirit, and I just go with the flow, and I'm just spiritual. I don't prescribe or subscribe to any of those religions. I'm just free. It's a lie. Because what it creates is that free spirit, and this makes you jump from this thing to that thing, out of that thing into something worse, and is scratching that itch further and further and further. And what looks like freedom creates deeper soul bondage than you can ever climb yourself out of. And so God says, he says, let them go so that they can worship me in the wilderness. Let them out of your bondage so that I can introduce to them what freedom feels like. In the presence of God is the fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore. And like I think I've said for the last year, Satan does not have the ability to create. And because he does not have the ability to create, what he does is he imitates. He wants to make you think that what he's giving you is better than what God has given you. So the idea that in the presence of God is the fullness of joy and pleasures forevermore, baby, I'll show you pleasure. You thought that's bondage. All them religious hypocrites over there, you don't want to be part of them. You don't want to go over there. They're not happy all the time. They're miserable. They're hypocrites. And so you get over here and you enter into what is supposed to be pleasure, what's supposed to be freedom, and it's bondage in disguise, and you don't realize it until you don't know how to get loose. Okay, let's keep moving. He keeps going. Verse 2. We read verse 2. But I'm going to read verse 2 one more time. He says, if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, camels, on your cattle, your sheep, and your goats. Now, I want you to think about this. Prior to this, the plagues were luxury plagues. You know, you have the drinking the water. There was still water. It was the water of the Nile. You could still bathe. You just couldn't bathe in the Nile. The frogs were an inconvenience. They were everywhere, but it wasn't impeding anything. So then you go, all the other plagues have caused chaos, but they've not impeded anybody's wallet. They've just kept me from being convenient. This plague attacks the wallet. This plague attacks my ability to get around, because he's going to kill the horses, the donkeys, the cattle, the sheep, the goats, the things that you sell, the things that are markers of wealth, the things that make you somebody in society. I'm going to take all of that. So because your convenience didn't affect anything, I'm going to hurt you. Now, let's make that apply to your everyday life. When God is trying to get your attention, he'll start making you conveniences a break. All of a sudden, your phone is broken. And I've learned in my life, especially somebody who has broken like 4 iPhones this year, whenever the phone breaks, God usually is like, hey, want to talk? Let's have a chat. Can't talk to the rest of the world, why don't you talk to me? The conveniences begin to go. And what I've learned is if you won't obey, if you don't want to talk to him after the convenience is gone, well, let me touch your wallet. Because if I can talk to you, I know you're going to pray to me if I can touch your wallet. One of Avery and I's friends got married last year, and her dad officiated the wedding. And she was talking about, how when he was getting, she had brain cancer at one point. And when she was diagnosed with brain cancer, her father was having an affair on her mother. And he was kind of the mind, I pay the bills here, I do the thing, whatever. And she gets diagnosed with tumors on her brain, and he begins to try to pray for his daughter. And God says, no, we got to talk about that other thing first. I got Madison. You hadn't been talking to me. And it seems kind of dark. God, why would you put her in harm's way just so you could get my attention? But sometimes I tried your conveniences. I tried your money. Now I've got to get to your heart so that I can re-enter your heart. Now I've got to get the things that'll get your attention, because I tried to get your convenience. I broke the phone. I made the car break down. I've been trying to get your attention in small, subtle ways, but I'm having to do bigger and bigger things to get your attention, and now you think your baby girl is about to die. I've got her. I already healed her. I just had to get your attention. And of course, Madison is well. As a matter of fact, she just announced today that her and her husband are having a baby. She's doing great. But what God had to do in her dad is things had to get a little hairy for a little bit. Things had to get a little inconvenient for a little while, until he had submitted himself back to the service and the attention of God. And so God does this to the Egyptian people, specifically to Pharaoh. But if you're going to hurt Pharaoh, you got to hurt the people. And that's kind of, the idea. So he brings this plague. Now I want you to also notice this, is that it says the hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague. Until this point, we've been saying the finger of God. It's been talking about and the finger of God and the finger of God. Now you'd have really made him mad. Because now the hand of God, which means that this is going to be really uncomfortable. This is really going to cause some pain. I was pinching you before, but now we've got a little bit of pain. Let's go to verse 4. Verse 4. And then it says, the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt, so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die. Verse 5. And the Lord set a time and said, tomorrow the Lord will do this in the land. And the next day the Lord did it, and all the livestock of the Egyptians died, but no one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died, yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. Now, I'm sure you're asking the question, why some cows? Why donkeys? Why did you choose this particular plague? Because in our day, if there was a plague on cows, it might get to us in 6 months after we finally run out of beef. But I want you to see this. In Egypt at this time, there were 4 jurisdictions in Egypt that used the seal of the cow as their gods of that part of the country. And so there was this lead god among them. His name was Apis. And he had the second largest temple in all of Egypt. And his symbol was a bull. And let me tell you about this. You know, Apis the bull, they say, was birthed through a moonbeam of heaven, and he was born. Every time one Apis died, another one was born, and they worshiped these bulls. And as they worshiped these bulls, they worshiped them so much that when the bulls died, they put them not in the ground, they put them in the mausoleum. A cow. They put the cow in the mausoleum, and they mummified them. And so much so that they had what they, is a big word, and I don't want to look it up right now, but there's a big word. They had a cities of corpses of pharaohs and kings, and they had the cows, their bodies among them, as if the cows were just as important, kind of like the Indians do. If you know, Indians as in India, like Indians. But they had these large town-sized cemeteries, and it came from Osiris, the god of the afterlife. In other words, I'm telling you all of this to say this: God was attacking their worship system. Remember when the frogs came, he was attacking that god. And now he's attacking their worship system, because if you're worshiping cows and I can kill all the cows, those cows didn't have the kind of power you thought they had. If you're worshiping frogs, like we talked about the last time, and all of a sudden the frogs are making you inconvenient, and they were supposed to be of wealth and convenience and show you all this might and this power, if I make all of these things go haywire, I'm showing you that your system doesn't work. And I think sometimes we got to take a moment, step back, and just because we've been doing something a long time doesn't mean that it's functional. Just because we're accustomed to going a certain way doesn't mean that it's working. I love my grandparents. I'm going to just preface it before I say what I'm about to say. I love my grandparents. I really do. I really do. And I'm going to see them tomorrow to go help them fix a TV that's probably not broken. But I love my grandparents. But what I've learned about my grandparents is because they're in their 80s, they have some systems in their house that are not efficient. Not efficient at all. And I'm glad they're on board now. But when I was growing up, they would go to 5 different grocery stores on the same day, so that they could get the bacon that was on sale at Food Giant, and they could get the beef that was on sale at 10, Cost Plus, so that they could go down to Aldi and get the vegetables and spend the whole day grocery shopping. And I could never understand it. I was like, we could just go to Winn-Dixie. They got all the stuff at Winn-Dixie. Pay the extra cent. We're wasting it in gas. But they have systems that they're accustomed to. Now, you know, I put them on the ship, and now they call me to order their groceries and get them delivered. But that's neither here nor there. My point is this, is sometimes we have systems that we've been using for a long time, because a long time ago, they served us really well. They had these systems of worshiping these different gods. And up until this point, it worked for them. You know, they didn't know any better. They didn't know Jehovah Jireh, my provider. They knew, okay, I'm going to call Osiris. If Osiris don't answer, I'm going to call Ra. If Ra don't answer, I'm going to call this one. And so God is exposing them to better. And I want to present this idea, and I kind of played with it Sunday, but I don't think I played with it like I should have, is that unless you are exposed to better, you'll never do better. And so what God is purposely doing here in this Exodus, this first portion of Exodus, he's exposing the Egyptians. Because I don't know if you know, when we read through Exodus and Joshua, the mixed multitude isn't just Jews. There are thousands of Egyptians who leave Egypt with the Hebrews. Thousands of Egyptians who said, maybe Yahweh is onto something. Maybe this pantheon of gods wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. And even though Pharaoh was always hard-hearted, and even though I came up in this way, there's something here. There's something that I've missed up until this point. And so because they were exposed to the hand, the finger, the heart, the mind of God, now all of a sudden it's time to turn. And for those of us who are saved, I want to push you a little bit further. It may not be the exposure to God. It might be the exposure to God's way of thinking. I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and I really hope he's not listening because he's going to be upset with me. But we were talking about tithing. And he's in the process of looking for a new church home. And he was like, I don't think I'm going to tithe to the church. I think I'm going to just take my 10% and I'm going to just be a blessing to somebody random. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but that's an offering. That's not tithing. That's an offering. You can do an offering. That's cool. But tithing comes with protections and insurance and stuff that you want to make sure that you are actually bringing this tithe into the storehouse. And he was like, yeah, but I don't really like how churches deal with their funds. And so I think I'm going to just do it my way. And as we talked and as we explored and we talked, he didn't really want to hear what I was saying. It didn't mean that the law didn't work. It didn't mean that the rule didn't work. His heart was just a little hard. Let's keep moving. All right, verse 8. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from a furnace, and then have Moses toss it in the air in the presence of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt and festering boils. And with the it will break out on people and animals throughout the land. So they took the soot from a furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it into the air, and festering boils broke out on the people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils that they were on them and on all the Egyptians. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord said to Moses. In the summers in Egypt, there's a phenomenon called Nile boils or Nile fever. And what happens is because of the heat and the heat and the dust, people break out in these blue blisters all on their skin. And so there's a whole lot of scientists that when they're trying to rebut the Bible, they say, this is just the Nile boil fever situation. This couldn't have been anything like this. But I want you to see this. When the priest, the Egyptian priest, not the priest of God, when the priest in Egypt would issue out a blessing on the people, they would take the soot, they would take the same dust, they would throw it into the air, and they would be a blessing from that pagan god. God is specifically, again, attacking the religious system here because the boils that fell here were worse than this Nile fever could have ever been. It pussed and it itched, and it didn't go away in a couple of days like the other one did. But God is also saying, okay, I'm going to show you this because y'all are putting your stock in these priests. So I'm going to make the whole land break out in these boils. And as I make the entire land break out in these boils, even the priests that you would go to for blessing are going to get them. A couple of weeks ago, I told you that the priests, when they would get the boils, or if they would have a skin impediment, or if they would get dirty, they couldn't be priests. They had to go sit it out until their skin was clean, till their clothes were clean. They would bathe 5, 6, 7 times a day because their outward cleanliness was so important. Now, here's what I want you to see. The priest who would issue a blessing are now incapacitated. The people who would normally come to a place to get healing, there's no place to go. The magicians, the text says, can't even go because they too have boils. So when a time comes for them to try to rebut what Pharaoh's doing, they can't even come see Moses because they too have the boils and the blisters. And so what could look like a natural phenomenon, God is literally saying, okay, y'all still don't want to worship me? I'm going to take what y'all thought worship looked like, and I'm going to make it hurt you. I'm going to take what you thought would heal you, and I'm going to make it worse. And I want you to see this because a lot of us, and it's going to be some folks upset with me about this, because I had a friend call me and tell me that his medicine was reefer. And I was trying to explain, I was like, I don't think that that's a good thing. But here's what I want you to see is that after a while, if you spend a whole lot of time in the middle of something that is sinful, God will use that very thing that you call medicinal, or that very thing that you said was going to help you. You know, people use the crystals, or they use the various things, the burning the sage, and for a little bit it makes you feel better. You get in that thing a little bit longer. I've known people who've lost their minds doing that stuff. They've completely lost their sensibilities, completely lost it all. Because the thing, again, it's kind of like the sin and the bondage thing I was trying to explain to you earlier. Again, it looks like it's a good thing. Looks like it's you being spiritual is a blessing. But you're getting that thing long enough, it begins to take apart the parts of you that God made for good. The mind, the body, the strength. You think about it. And maybe I need to say this. You smoke marijuana, and you feel good for a moment. And then all of a sudden you start moving a little bit slower. Start thinking a little bit slower. You begin to enjoy that state that it puts you in, so you smoke a little bit more weed. Then you wake up smoking weed, and then you go to sleep smoking weed, and then you smoke weed when you get happy, you smoke weed when you get sad, and before you know it, you're so consumed with it that now I'm late for work. Now I really, if that's the thing that is my motivation, that's why I'm going to work, that's why I'm moving and shaking, and it has now taken over your life, and it's slowed you down. It's kept you in bondage. And you're thinking that this is the way life is supposed to be because you can't handle to deal with life. But again, like I told you, in the presence of God is the fullness of joy, it's the pleasures forevermore. And so you're thinking that you needed a numbing agent instead of a cure. Now, I say all of that to say this, that they are in bondage, they are ill, looking for a solution, and as they're looking for a solution, all the other gods that they would call, or the priests that they would call, they don't have access to. And they don't have access to them because if I can't use the thing I've always gone to, I got to look for a new solution. And if the new solution is this God I've never been aware of, or I've never seen, or I've never experienced, I've at least got to be curious if there's one section of town and nobody has bumps. There's one section of town and nobody's cows and donkeys and cattle are dead. It's one section of town that didn't get any frogs. I've got to at least begin to get some curiosity that if hell is breaking loose and it's one section of town, what's different over there? What do they know that we don't know? Because the whole country is sick. And the whole country is falling apart. What do they know that we don't know? Now, what I also want you to think about, they're throwing soot in the air. God has told Moses, throw the soot in the air. The word here in the Hebrew is literally brick furnace or brick kiln. You remember the Egyptians were slaves that were building these pyramids and these statues, and at the beginning, he tells them, build the bricks without the straw. This brick kiln was an emblem to suffering for the Egyptians. God has now flipped it, redeemed it. He said, the thing that was a picture of suffering for you is now a picture of suffering for them. And I just want to get you to think for a minute. There are some things that are suffering. They are insufferable for you. There are places that cause you headache, heartache, and pain. But by the end of it, God will have flipped it where it is a place of headache, heartache, and pain for the people that were causing it for you if you'll stay in place. Stay in position. Don't leave, don't run. Be in the place that God told you to be in. Because if you'll stay there, if you'll do what you're supposed to do and you'll be faithful, the thing that caused you pain will begin to cause pain on other people, and it'll be a symbol of your freedom if you stay where God told you to stay. Okay. Here we go. Let's keep moving. Verse 13. And then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so that they may worship me. Or this time, I will send full force of the plagues against you and against your officials and your people so that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now, I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would wipe you off the earth, but I have raised you up for this very, very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. You still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt. From that day to the day that it was founded until now. Now, Jesus talks about the end time. When he talks about it, he describes the way that he says it. It sounds like how he describes the end times. There's going to be a great hailstorm, and they're going to say in the end times where they say that the hail is going to be about the size of a talent. A talent is about 120 pounds. Now, these were about a third the size. A third of 120 is still a lot of weight. If we're going to be just frank about it, it's still like 75 pounds. Can y'all imagine if big chunks were falling out the sky that weighed 75 pounds? You know, we complain about golf ball sized hail. You know, let's put it in perspective. We complain about golf ball sized hail. 75-pound chunks falling out the sky. Like just falling out the sky. You walking down the street, like out of here. Like done for. No more me, no more kid, no more anything. Like knocked out. Hail, this hailstorm that is coming down like never been seen before. And he says this, verse 19, he says, give an order now and bring your livestock and everything you have into the field to a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person and animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die. Now watch this, verse 20. Those officials who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. So Pharaoh's not getting it. But Pharaoh's higher ups are starting to say, now wait a minute. The river done turned to blood. It was frogs everywhere. I had a rash out of this world last week. I think this guy means business. Everything that he has said is going to happen. You know, he's got snakes coming out of here. Everything that he has said was going to happen has happened. And so the officials of Pharaoh, not just the common people, not just the regular old grandma on the corner, the officials, his second in command, and all the people, they who feared the word of the Lord, hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. I want you to see this. There are some people who get it. They've been watching you for years. They ain't said nothing to you. They didn't even subscribe to your YouTube channel. They didn't like the post on Facebook. They don't comment on your Instagram post, but they've been watching. And they're starting to get it. They're starting to see how God has blessed you and how you've been able to survive and how you've been able to level up time after time after time, and how the things that you do are starting to work. They didn't get it at first. They didn't understand at first. They thought that you were one of them crazy Christians that we see on the news, on Fox, all the time. But they're starting to get it, because it seems like even when you go through hell, you come out better. Even when you looks like everybody is out to get you, somehow you still have joy. Somehow it seems as though even though things don't make sense, God somehow has kept you, protected you, and made ways for you. And so I want you to see this, that the officials of Pharaoh are beginning to fear God, fear what God is going to say, and so they bring their stuff inside. And then, 21, it says, but those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and their livestock in the field. Folks who didn't get it. And then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky so that the hail will fall all over Egypt, on the people and the animals, on everything growing in the fields of Egypt. And when Moses stretched out his staff toward the sky, the Lord sent thunder and hail, and lightning flashed down to the ground. So the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt, and hail fell, and lightning flashed back and forth. And it was the worst storm in the land of Egypt ever since it became a nation. Throughout Egypt, hail struck everything in the fields, at both people and animals, and beat down everything growing in the fields. Now, the only place, verse 26, the only place that it did not hail was in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites here were. And then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron, and he said, this time I have sinned. And he said to them, the Lord is in the right. I and my people are in the wrong. Now, that's the first thing I want you to see. I think Pharaoh has been sinning this whole time. But notice we said, this time I have sinned. This time, I wasn't sinning when I provoked you to make everybody get boils. I wasn't sinning when I provoked the frogs to come. I wasn't sinning, but this time I have sinned. He said, the Lord is right, and I and my people are in the wrong. But watch what happens in verse 28. In verse 28, he says, pray to the Lord, for we have had enough thunder and hail, and I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer. Now, that sounds right. It sounds good. Pharaoh said, let's pray. Pharaoh said, I'm sorry. It sounds like a repentance prayer. It sounds like Pharaoh has got it. But that ain't quite what happens. Let's go on to 29. Moses replied, he says, when I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord, and the thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail, so you may know that the earth is the Lord's. Let's keep going. But I know you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God. Now, can you imagine? He's standing there with Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I messed up. I've sinned. We're wrong. It's cool. Can you go pray and make it go away? And Moses, sure, I'll go pray. But I know you don't believe me. I know you don't get it. And it kind of reminds me of when, I'm really trying to be nice tonight, but it's not working. It reminds me of when you have an atheist friend or an agnostic friend who they dog you out about praying all the time until something goes wrong in their life. And then as soon as something goes wrong, will you pray for me? I thought you didn't believe in prayer. I thought you said I was crazy for praying. I thought. And then as soon as everything gets right, and grandma gets out the hospital or the marriage starts getting back on track, they go back to the same old thing because they view the God as if you really work, you're a vending machine. And if you don't really work, well, you're a vending machine that doesn't work, and I was right. And so he says, I know you don't believe, and I know you don't fear God, but I want you to see something. There is a difference between belief and respect, or belief and fear. You can believe something exists, but you haven't put your belief in it. You can believe that there is a God in heaven. There's a whole lot of people who say, I believe in a higher power, but it's even more people who say, but Jesus ain't really my cup of tea. There's a difference between belief and fear. There's a difference between confession and belief, because what happens is I can believe that God is making this happen, but I can still choose not to follow him. I can believe that God is allowing whatever is going on in my life, but I still choose not to obey him. He's not worth following for me. And I want you to see this, because there are plenty of people who will think that they will make it to heaven. I knew there was a higher power. And they're going to get to the pearly gates and they're going to negotiate. They're like, I knew that there was a higher power. I didn't quite know it was you. I thought the Christians, but I always knew you existed. And Jesus is going to be like, I never knew you. I didn't know you. And so Pharaoh is like a type of that, because Pharaoh's sitting there, he's like, clearly you got power, but, I think Osiris got power. I think Ra got power. You just mad today. And since you're mad today, let me negotiate and get you to calm down so that I can put you back in line neatly with all the other gods, and we'll leave them alone. And so for a second, I want us to think about this, because there's this thing called polytheism, and that's what we've been dealing with over the last several weeks. Polytheism is where you believe you have multiple gods, okay? But then there's this other thing, and it's called henotheism, and it's like where you believe that you have gods or goddesses that are assigned to certain areas. And so, it's likely, and some scholars believe, and I kind of did a little research today, where they believe that Pharaoh, they believe that Yahweh, or our God, it was assigned to the God like plagues. And so he's upset. He's assigned to these Israelite people. And so he can't help anybody but the Israelites. And so until I let him go, that's his thing. But henotheism, I want to break it down a little bit further. We see a good example of it in 1 Kings chapter 20. 1 Kings chapter 20, we see this conversation taking place between the Syrians and the Israelites. And it reads this way. The Syrians are talking here in verse 23. And it says, "And the servants of the king of Syria said unto him, the gods are the gods of the hills. Therefore they were stronger than we, but they let us fight against them in the plain, and surely will be stronger than they." So let me clue you in on what's going on right here. The Syrians are about to go to war with the Israelites. They think that because the Israelites go up into the mountains, they sing the Psalms of Hymns, and they go up to the mountains to sacrifice to God, that God only has power in the mountains. And so they're convinced that God can only win a war in the mountains. But since the Syrians worshiped a God that was in the valleys, they were convinced that if we fight this war in the valleys, we'll win if we fight it in the valleys. So let's go to the Israelites, coax them down to the valleys, because surely their God can't win in the valleys. Now, but I want you to see this. In verse 28 of 1 Kings, 20, it says, "But then there came a man of God and spoke unto the king of Israel and said, Thus saith the Lord, because the Syrians said, The Lord is the God of the hills, but he is not the God of the valleys. Therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into thine hand, and you'll know that I am the Lord." So God is basically saying, you know what, I can fight in the hills. I can fight in the valleys. I can fight in the city. I can fight in the field. And I'm still going to be successful. I'm still going to win. I'm still going to bring victory home to my people. And so what I want you to see here is Moses is trying to explain and express to Pharaoh that I know you don't believe that God is sovereign. Sovereign, he can do anything at any time, at any place. I know you don't believe God is sovereign, but in verse 31, verse 30, he said, 29, I'm sorry. He says, "When I've gone out of the city, I'll spread my hands out in prayer to the Lord, and the thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail, and so that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that your officials don't believe me." So I know y'all are in polytheism. Y'all kind of think that this is a henotheistic thing, so you kind of think that God only works in certain realms. But I want you to understand that I am representing a God who can show up at any time, at any place, in any situation. And if I've got to cause 3 more plagues to happen or 10 more plagues to happen, we're going to do that, because I need you to understand that I'm not like Ra and Osiris or the god of Nuit or any of these. I'm different, and he still haven't quite gotten it. So, but for those of you who are taking notes, whether you're at home or not, we talked about polytheism, we talked about henotheism, and there's one more called syncretism. And all syncretism is when you take one religion and bring parts of it into another. And I just want to talk about that tonight, only because we're starting to see that happen in society. What syncretism would look like is when King Ahab got married to Jezebel. King Ahab was a Jewish king. He married Jezebel, who was, she was Syrian? She was a foreign. She worshiped other gods. And he married her, and they tried to do a mixed marriage in religion. Now, what that would look like in your everyday life, and I know that there are some people who will disagree with me, but that would look like, God, I need peace. God, grant me peace. And then we go do the Buddhist practice of yoga because we felt like the peace didn't come quick enough. Or we would say, God, I need joy. Or God, I need this, that, and the other. And then all of a sudden we would go get some crystals and we burn some sage and we bring that in here, and then we'd be like, hey, I'm making it all work. Or we would do all these things and pair these worldly cult-like activities with our faith and say, well, I know how to do them all. And God is essentially saying, yeah, that ain't who I am. It's me or nothing. You either pick them, you can pick all of them. You can have all of them, gain the whole world. But if you get all of them, you can't have me. You can have all 120 of the Egyptian gods. You can get all the Indian gods. You can get this one, that one. You can go do the voodoo down in New Orleans. You can do all that stuff. But if you pick them, you can't have me. All right, we're almost done. Verse 31. He says, the flax and the barley were destroyed since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. Now, I want to bring this to our attention. Flax and barley heading was something that happened in January. You remember the Nile turned to blood in July. We're 7 months into this thing. And I don't know about you, but I think when I was reading this as a kid, I thought this was like 10 days. Like I thought Moses woke up on one day, showed up, and the next day he showed up, and the next day he showed up, and maybe 10 days, maybe 20, and it was over. But this is over 7 months. Over 7 months, Egypt is suffering. Over 7 months, he's going back and forth with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh won't budge, and Pharaoh won't move, and Pharaoh, he's negotiating. And the whole of the 10 plagues takes about 9 months. Now, a couple of chapters ago, we see God refer to Israel as his firstborn. And as he refers to them as his firstborn, I think it's really interesting that it takes 9 months from the beginning of the judgment to the end of them coming out. It takes 9 months. God is giving birth to a people. And I want you to see this because God is always a God of process. God will begin to bring you out of something and you're like, he has forgot me. It seems like things are getting worse. I felt like this would have been over by now. Felt like I would have gotten out of this by now. And God is a birthing process because anytime God gets ready to birth something, he's going to try to attract and do all that he can do in that process. And so some people might get hurt in the process. You might get boogered up and get some bruises. But as you're going through that process, there's a whole bunch of people watching you go through it. Whole bunch of people watching you move, watching them treat you wrong, but they're also watching you come out. They're watching you go in fire, but come out not smelling like smoke. They're watching you experience some things. Everybody's going through it, and your stuff isn't touched. And so when you finally come out, you finally exit, God has put you in position to come out better than you could have ever imagined. Verse 32. The wheat and spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripened later. Then Moses left Pharaoh and went out of the city, and he spread out his hand toward the Lord, and the thunder and the hail stopped. The rain no longer poured down on the land. And then Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and thunder had stopped. He sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. And so Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as the Lord said to Moses. And I want to end here. I kind of want to tell a story. There was a wealthy businessman probably about 100 years ago who bought a microscope. He was so in love with this microscope, so excited about this microscope, that he eats his favorite meal, he puts it on the microscope, and then he sees that there's a whole bunch of microorganisms moving all throughout it. He's disgusted. He's so disgusted. And I think the rational thing to do here was to change your diet. Pick something else to eat. He gets angry at the microscope and throws it away. Says the microscope is the problem. And I want to challenge somebody because sometimes we get revelation about our lives. We get revelation about the word. And instead of wanting to change, like Pharaoh is having an issue right now, instead of wanting to change our hearts, our minds, what we do is we throw the revelation away. We change take that insight, and we're like, I don't like that. That wasn't comfortable. So we throw that out the door. And we foolishly think that we can pretend to be ignorant like we used to be. I want to challenge somebody this evening, push you a little bit further. The revelation, whether you ignore it or not, is not going anywhere. The truth about whatever you're doing or ingesting is not going anywhere. And so I want to challenge you to actually deal with the root of the problem. And everybody's got a different problem. I don't know what your problem is. And truthfully, I don't care to know what your problem is. you know. And I'm saying that in a I'm not nosy kind of way. But I want to challenge you. If this has highlighted an issue in your life, let's deal with the problem. Let's deal with the issue instead of being mad that somebody called it out. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your grace, your mercy, your power. God, we thank you that you are from everlasting to everlasting. God, we thank you that you reveal to us the things that we do wrong so that we can get an opportunity to get it right on this side. And so, God, this evening I pray that you would redeem our time, point us in the way that we ought to go, give us some understanding. God, I don't want to be a fool, or I don't want to be ignorant, but rather, God, I would, in all of my getting, my desire is that we would get some understanding. And so, God, equip us with wisdom, God. Equip us with knowledge so that we can continue to walk in your will and in your way. God, we love you. We praise you. In Jesus Christ's precious name, amen. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us in the sanctuary. We'll catch you next week. Be blessed.